I don't know of it. I didn't go to it.
My wife had my wife had a table.
Yeah, I saw that.
Oh, wow. We have a really interesting, kind of neat. Yeah, I've never been to anything like that.
I think
Of course, it's just something that's you know, the carousel. You know, my history, but it was pretty fun. Yeah. Yeah. It was Hartland was pretty active that day.
Well, and then you go over to the soccer. This is soccer lacrosse.
Theater.
That's what we
whatever the champion
He was there.
event.
Yeah, because I remember taking we went to the groundbreaking.
The oldest would be on soccer.
So yeah, he's one of the
My
guys
youngest
in
would
the
be
picture
in
in
like
the there.
a stroller, and all he wanted to do was get.
Yeah, but anyways, that's moving so
go and
fast.
play.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
You know, so there was like no
I'm
place to
so
really
curious to
play.
see how what will happen
Yeah.
as time goes on here.
You guys about good?
Anyone coming to our township for
Now they're all grown.
planning to get around.
You about ready?
The outskirts of it.
You good? The sooner we start, the
My wife said the same.
All right, we have the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, June 14th, 2018. I'd like to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Keith, would you take roll, please?
Sure. Larry Fox.
Here.
Jeff Newsom.
Here.
Joe Kalani.
Here.
Sue Grissom.
Here.
Mike Mitchell.
Here.
Tom Murphy.
Here.
All righty, thank you. Next up, item 4, approval of our meeting agenda.
So moved.
Support.
Motion from Commissioner Newsom, second from Commissioner Mitchell. Any changes? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Approval of our May 10, 2018 meeting minutes.
So moved.
Support.
Motion from Commissioner Voigt, second from Commissioner Kalani. All those in, any changes?
Nope.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Next up, call to the public. No one is here. We're up to item 7A, Ordinance Review Committee recommendations to amend the ordinance. Probably the best thing to do, just turn this one over to Troy and let him walk us through the item.
Okay. This is a little bit new to me on your process here. The initiation of a zoning text amendment. Based on how I read your ordinance, it says the Planning Commission or the board shall initiate that ordinance amendment, which means there has to be some kind of formal action here by the Planning Commission to initiate that ordinance amendment. After that's occurred, we would then post the legal notice that's required. It would then come back to you at the Planning Commission. Once it's been posted, you would review it, decide it, tweak it, send it back to the Ordinance Review Committee, approve it or recommend approval of it, whatever you so desire. If you then did recommend to approve the ordinance amendment, it would then go on to the Township Board, and they could do the same, recommend or actually approve it, deny it, tweak it, send it back to the Planning Commission, whatever the case may be. We also have several of them here, so it's unusual to have more than just one, but some of these are fairly minor. What I thought I'd do is just briefly walk through them and then just basically be open for available for answers to any questions. Again, you're not approving these tonight. It's just to initiate the amendment. So the first one is to amend the site plan expiration process. I think all of you are familiar with a couple of site plans that had expired. They came back to the Planning Commission. There were no changes to the site plan. There were no changes to the ordinance. And the thought process there is, under those two circumstances, when the site plan has expired, there has been no change to the site plan, and the ordinances have not changed, it might be better to just have that be addressed administratively by staff. So that was the goal there. The existing language was a little unclear as to how much staff could approve, what had to go to the Planning Commission. I think now what we've done is clarified that, and the what essentially is there is that staff could grant a 1-year extension could do that. I think there's 3 extensions that staff could grant, and at the 4th year, then it would have to come back to the Planning Commission. So the first thing is the site plan has not changed. The second thing is there's been no ordinance that has changed that would affect that site plan. Under those 2 circumstances, staff could approve, I think it's 3 extensions. Then after that, the ordinance review committee felt maybe the Planning Commission should look at it that time, just maybe they have a different viewpoint. So
yeah, I think one other key point in that was not those are fine, but the letter that they had to initiate for the request, we modified their opportunity and made it easier for them. So I will quickly explain that.
The current ordinance requires them to submit a letter and request an extension prior to it expiring. Nobody had ever done that. So we had taken that requirement out, that they would have to write a letter requesting an extension, but it didn't necessarily have to be timely filed prior to it expiring. So that's the...
So they'll still need to request the extension? Yeah. Just can happen whenever?
Yeah.
What's the statute of limitations on that request? I mean, can it be 10 years from now, or does it...
No, ultimately, up to a maximum of that 4th year triggers it having to come back.
Okay, so no matter what, you've got 3-year period, and then it has to come back to the Planning Commission. No matter if there's an extension or not, if they want to re-up.
Yeah, but it doesn't get extended unless under those 2 circumstances.
Yeah, I get that part. But yeah, I was just looking at the total time frame.
Yep.
No,
I mean, because there's a
good question.
The question I have though is 4 years. I thought 1 year was ridiculous, but is 4 years really something that we should be going out that far? I mean, I understand the purpose of real estate development, but a lot can happen within 4 years, and again, I think you still have a little bit of protection with the idea that if there's changes in the zoning ordinance. But keep in mind, we do a master plan every 5 years, and master planning becomes an important issue. Site plan becomes a right. Once the site plan is approved, it's a right, and if there's changes in what may entail because of master planning, I'm just thinking 4 years might be a little bit too long. That's just.
And the 4-year, the reason that was picked is that was already in the language there. So if that's something the Planning Commission wants to change, give that consideration.
It's actually one thing we talked about with ourselves, but we also looked at history. And if you look at all the site plans that came back for reapproval, they went over a period of 4 years. And we actually, the economy went up and down during those years. So we kind of felt we had a pretty good handle on it, but we had the same concern Joe did at first. So if you want to look at it that way, it's another way to make a decision on it.
But as planning director, you always have the discretion to say, no, I'm not going to extend this. I think that the Planning Commission needs to take another look at it.
No,
well, if there was a change on the, if there's a change on the site plan, or there was a change to the ordinance, then the planning director would no longer have any discretionary authority. It would automatically have to come back.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to cover what your concern of, like, okay, say things change in 3 years, but they still have that 1 other year. But okay, things have changed, circumstances have changed, and there's going to be no discretion then.
Yeah.
There's going to be no discretion to say, yeah, I want to bring this back to the Planning Commission.
I think if I understand your question is that he's saying that you can not exercise your discretion, and basically even in year 1, even with those requirements, you can say, no, this is going to go back to the Planning Commission.
Yeah, we didn't build in any standards like that. In order for me to make that kind of a decision, you should really have some standards that I'm looking at. And I'm not just carte blanche, I don't like you today, so therefore you're going back to the Planning Commission.
I would just, if you had that discretion, that would make me a bit more comfortable, actually. Just because things change, Planning Commissions might change, who knows. But I guess, that's something we need to think about then.
I'm not sure the Planning Commission would have any more discretion than the planning director once the site plan's been approved.
No.
Not based on other than ordinance or
No.
zoning or the
Well,
development changes.
I would think if, well, I don't know, but I would think if this were in here and the planning commission approved a site plan and they went up for a renewal and you gave it to them, and then the next time they came and you didn't because we kind of changed our mind,
Yeah.
we might have a problem. Not
Right.
being a lawyer, I just wondering what,
Yeah.
and maybe the option and the opportunity would be to shorten those years for things that could change, that you might want to say no.
I don't-
Because really, it's almost, if you get the initial approval, it's a rubber stamp for 3 more. Because there's nothing in here to say no if the site plan doesn't change and the ordinance doesn't.
That's right. So I would not have any ability to.
So maybe it should be shortened. I mean, it can always come back. I think this came out of, in the last year, we've had the vet clinic show up, didn't change anything.
KFC office.
KFC office, where you look at them and you go, man, we're coming all the way in here for an 8-minute meeting.
Right.
And so now you got to decide how long do you want to let that go, it sounds
Yeah.
like. How long do you want to give them to get their ducks in a row?
And, you know, those applicants aren't happy. They have to pay a
come
new application fee. Everything's on hold for, it's not as if they applied yesterday and are here today. That's several weeks, almost a month wait for them to come here. So just to give you a heads up on that. It's not just a quick process from their viewpoint to have to come back here.
So back to the letter of request for an extension. You stated that you don't have to submit a letter in a timely fashion. Is there a limit? Do I have?
Oh, yeah, there would be that 4-year period, so they would have to.
So if I got a site plan approval and just sat for 3 years and then came in and said, oh, by the way, I want to request a renewal of this site plan, and it's within that 4-year period, that's fine and dandy. Why aren't we requesting in a timely fashion?
Oh, within the
A
year?
request to extend the,
Because what we were seeing in the real world is nobody was submitting their letter within the expiration period. So a site
I
plan.
understand that, but why not have a limitation of a year and 3 months or something like that you have to submit a request for an extension?
Yeah, that makes sense. So then if we did that and it was a year and 3 months, and keep in mind the Hartland or the Town and Country Animal, that was more than a year and 3 months. The goal was so that they didn't have to come back here. So under that circumstance, we'd modify the ordinance, but then they'd still have to come back.
Come back?
To the Planning Commission.
No, I'm speaking, they would still come back to yourself. But we're basically dropping the request letter in essence. I have 4 years to submit a letter that says, oh, by the way, Troy, I'd like to make an extension here.
Yeah, well, any time you put on that letter, you're requiring them to submit a letter within a certain time period. The goal is to extend the site plan approval. And if they fail to submit the letter in that time period, the way the ordinance reads currently, they got to come back here in front of you. So what we're trying to do is circumvent that by saying if they don't submit a letter timely, they can still just be reviewed administratively by staff. It's not truly 4 years. I mean, that's the maximum time period that staff could approve. They have to start construction on that site within that 4th year. So depending on what they've got to do, they can't quite just sit back and do nothing. But I can somewhat see your concern of they should have to somewhat submit a letter by some date, but the problem we ran into at the Ordinance Review Committee is what purpose is served there? What are you gaining? What is it we're protecting? What are we trying to do by having them submit a letter, and what happens if they don't submit a letter by that time period?
Is exactly right. I mean,
Well, if they don't and 4 years expires, that part of it's already been answered.
Yeah.
Then the site plan approved is null and void.
So what if it's been 2 years? They've never submitted a letter, now they said, we want to start it up, here's my letter. And we had made it to where they had to submit a letter within a year and 6 months. So now it's after that time period. What happens then?
I understand.
well, what happened is we had I mean, it's not cheap for them to come in for a site plan and to get the extension. I mean, what's the whole purpose of having them come into the planning commission for after it expired?